Today we'll look at our fifth of the major world religions, Islam, starting with core beliefs. Islam means submission, and for the religion they mean a person's submission to God, seeing God as everything in control. Muslim, a person who believes in Islam, means one who submits. Islam is a monotheistic religion from the Judeo-Christian tradition, which would all see themselves as monotheistic. And they would refer to their God as Allah, same way we see Judaism refer to their God as Yahweh. Islam would see that Judeo-Christian tradition, Jesus, Moses, Abraham, that we've talked about with our other religions, as like the beginning of the story. They would have been important leaders, prophets, etc. They would not see Christ as divine or the Messiah, much like we would see from Jewish faith. They will not recognize that divinity of Jesus. And then they would add on. So they had all these prophets, these important leaders. In Islam, they believed Muhammad was the final and most important prophet. At its core, Islam will have 5 pillars, 5 key things a Muslim is expected to do and believe. A declaration of faith, saying that there is but one God and that God is Allah. Prayer 5 times a day, and we think of that traditional bowing on a mat toward Mecca. And that makes sense when you think about Islam as this idea of submission to God. Almsgiving, giving to others, charitable giving, fasting, particularly during the holy month of Ramadan, not eating. And then the Hajj, which is a pilgrimage to Mecca. And every able-bodied Muslim who possibly can is expected to do this at least once in their lifetime. Muhammad was born in Mecca, which is in Saudi Arabia. If you look at the map up here, here is Saudi Arabia in the Middle East, mostly a desert peninsula. He's born in 610. He believes he has been visited by an angel of Allah who reveals the Quran. Now, this is really important. We talked about this with, say, the 10 Commandments in Judaism. Muslims believe that the words of the Quran were revealed to Muhammad. The Quran is not the words of Muhammad, the way we think of the Bible being the words of Christ, or the Old Testament, the Torah, being a history, or the words of prophets or songs. The Quran is holy text in a different sense. It is the literal words of God given through the vehicle of Muhammad, and all Muhammad does is record them, the way we talked about, say, the 10 Commandments in the Jewish or Christian traditions. So they see these important texts very differently. Muhammad will be forced out of Medina in 622. This is called the Hijrah in Islamic history. And he's forced out. He's made to leave. He's kind of causing problems. Think the way the Romans saw a challenge from Judaism and Christianity earlier in the millennium. For Muslims, this becomes year 0. So in a Muslim calendar, this would be year 0. The same way in a Christian calendar, year 0 would be roughly the birth of Christ. So he is forced out of Mecca, he escapes to Medina, and he rebuilds his life in Medina, and he gets followers and supporters, and they come back about 10 years later, and they conquer Mecca. And this religion is just growing with more and more followers. It will spread throughout the Middle East and North Africa through empire and trade. Politically, they will conquer empire. That empire will officially be Muslim, and it will help spread the religion. They will trade all over the world, and those merchants are Muslim, and they bring Islam all over the world. So these are similar ways we've seen, say, Christianity spread through the political empire of the Romans, but also Christianity and Buddhism spread along that Silk Road through trade. The holy text for Islam is the Quran. You can see either spelling there. They mean the same thing. And again, these are considered the literal words of God. And so that makes For conservative Muslims, even the idea of translating the Quran is problematic. You can't translate it. True conservative Muslims would say you must learn the Arabic and read it in the original language, because even just translating it would be you, a human, interpreting the words of God in a very traditional sense. So we do have a second text called the Hadith. These are the sayings of Muhammad. So this would really be more like what we think of in the Christian tradition, even the Jewish tradition, that Judeo-Christian tradition of the book. This Hadith would be more along the lines of the Bible or the Torah. Islam will have a expansive role beyond just religion. We've talked about this with other religions as well, how Judaism is really about a moral and ethical code as well as a spiritual side. We've talked about how Hinduism really works hand in hand with that caste system. We will see this with Islam as well. Next unit, we'll talk about this with the Catholic Church in Europe and how the church will have an army and laws and court systems and all sorts of things beyond what we would typically see as a religious area today. The same thing as Islamic world. Remember, these are big empires that are Muslim, and so they will have a law code based on those religious beliefs. It's called Sharia. We hear this a lot in our modern media today. It's their religious law, and it's that blending, which was very common at this point in history, for most of our human history, to have elements of theocracy, elements of blending of religion, politics, law, society, etc. Islam will also have two sects. We've talked about this with other groups, particularly Christians being Catholic, Orthodox, and Protestant, Muslim being Mahayana, Theravada, and Zen. Here we have Sunni and Shiite. And if you look at this map, you will see very clearly that the Shia, or the Shiite, is by far the minority of those Muslim sects. The vast majority of Muslims globally will be Sunni. It's kind of the mainstream group. This will split off very early in the Muslim tradition. Within a couple decades, within a couple generations of leadership, it will split, and we'll talk about why in our next unit of study. Also, if you look, you can see some of the places today that have the most violence and chaos would be those that have this kind of mix of Sunni and Shiite. And you hear this called sectarian violence. Sect. Right? The sects are fighting each other. The Sunni are fighting the Shia. Muslim versus Muslim. And that's a lot of what we're seeing in the Middle East right now. It's a lot of the reason Iraq and Iran have never gotten along. There's a lot of reasons why Iran would get along with Syria. If you look, there's a large population of Syrians who are Shiite. So this continues to create issues today. Here you can see some of those basic differences between Sunni and Shia. Again, you can see roughly 83% of Muslims today are Sunni. And it's really the split begins about this idea of succession. Who's going to be the next ruler? After Muhammad, we have several that everyone agrees upon, 3 or 4 caliphs that are not that controversial. And then it starts to be a question. Who gets to rightfully be a caliph? Does it have to be a descendant of Muhammad? Or can it be whoever's worthy, merit-based? And so we'll see that divide. Over time, we will see them grow to have more and more differences beyond just the political. And today, they would both claim the other one misinterprets the Quran. Here you can see a more detailed map of the Middle East. Again, right, Sunni being the light yellow, Shia being the dark. If you notice all these tan areas, that's basically desert where there's hardly anybody living. But you can see there's some pockets of Christianity through here, right? Particularly along this border right here. Think about how complicated that makes this area in northern Iraq and southeastern Turkey. Judaism would be here, modern day Israel. And then note somewhere like Afghanistan, how diverse it is, somewhere like Yemen. These are places that are experiencing a lot of sectarian violence today. And here, as we've looked at our 5 big religions, you can see based on data from around 2007, the rough breakdown. So if we look, Buddhism is almost 6% of the world's population. Hinduism is just over 13, Muslim 21, and then you would have to add over here. They broke down Christian. So 5, 1, 3.5, right, almost 6, and then 17. So you would add all those together. Those are different Christian sects. Note also how small the world population of Jews are comparatively, right, compared to, say, Christians or Muslims, Hindus, or even Buddhists. They're not even 1% of the population, but they are a really significant part of the population when you look at Western tradition. Their role in Europe, their role in the United States, their role in global politics when we look at the Middle East and the state of Israel. They're also significant because their founding really is at the heart of both the Christian and Muslim traditions. Abraham, Moses, Noah would all be part of these traditions. Similarly, right, Hindu would be a part of that Buddhist tradition.